In today's video, I'm gonna talk about the books I read during the month of February and what I thought of them. So hello my fellow fantasy book lovers and welcome to my channel. My name is Kathy and I'm a goth girl from Belgium who loves fantasy reading. In today's video, I'm going to go through the books that I actually read during the month of February. And if you have seen one of my previous videos, in the month of February, I actually wanted to read more romance-themed books and I actually made myself a TBR list. So the books that I wanted to read during the month of February. The first book that I finished in February is actually Ruthless Vows. This is the second book to the duology with Divine Rivals, in which we follow Iris and Kit, the two main characters from book one, as their journey together and discoveries together continue on in book two. Now, this book for me was not nearly as good as book one. Don't get me wrong, if you enjoyed book one, I'm very likely you will enjoy book two, but for me, it felt very, very heavy. And that's also, I was reading this in January but didn't finish it because it felt so heavy that I just needed a little bit more time to actually process it during reading. This book is heavily focused on war, and even if it's a magical war, I feel personally like it's very relatable to World War I, World War II, and also currently with other wars happening in the world. I wasn't enjoying this book as much. So I had very high hopes for this book and it didn't quite meet them, but that doesn't take away that the story is beautiful, it's really well written, and if maybe I was in a different headspace, I would have given this book a 5 stars, but for now, because how heavy it felt, I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. So if you enjoyed Divine Rivals, then I would highly recommend picking up Ruthless Vows as well. And if you're looking for a completed duology, I could also highly recommend it. So Divine Rivals and Ruthless Vows. The next book I read is also the second book in a duology. It is called These Twisted Bonds. The first book was called These Hollow Vows by Lexi Ryan. In the first book, we follow Gabriella as she is living her human life. You discover that there are some misfortunes happening to her and her family, and she's trying to get out of it by working very hard, etc. And in the first book, we follow her as she goes to the Fae world to actually maybe possibly get married to the Fae prince of what is believed to be like the Sun Court. So you have the Sun Court and the Night Court, or the Light and the Dark anyways. I really enjoyed book one. I read it on my holiday last year and I had been looking into getting book two, and now in February I finally finished it, and I must say that I loved the second book even more than the first one. However, it is a YA fantasy and it is rather predictable what will happen. So for me, again, this is a 4-star read and not a 5-star, but I did really enjoy it. So maybe if within this world we would have an adult fantasy book series, then I would enjoy that even more. If you're looking into a Fae romance, I think this is a really good book, but that also has a plotline other than the romance. It also involves other types of relationships that are more friendship based, and then other relationships next to that. So I think this book was way deeper than I expected from a YA book, and I really loved it. After that, we had my disappointment of the month. Don't get me wrong, this series as a whole has potential, but this particular book for me didn't work, and let me explain to you why. This book is part of the Hades x Persephone series by Scarlet St. Clair. And you have two types of books. You have the books that start with a touch of, and then the second type of books that starts with a game of. A touch of is the perspective of Persephone, and a game of is the perspective from Hades. And that's where, for me, it gets a little bit, was this really necessary? I did really enjoy the first book that I read, the Persephone's vision of this particular book, but I don't feel the need to have a second book that starts at the same point as the first book and ends at the same book at the first book that just tells the different perspective. I really don't feel like this was necessary. Right now I'm reading another dual POV book, and for me it's better that each chapter or a few chapters are written from one standpoint and then the other and alternating between them, but I really didn't feel the added value of having this book as a totally separate book. It was was also too recent for me that I read the other book, even if it had been months, to not know where this was going. I know exactly what was going to happen when, and honestly, it took away the excitement of reading a book for me. So I struggled to get through this. I did really enjoy having Hades' perspective, but I didn't feel like this should have been a separate book. And that's why this one is getting only 2 stars from me, because I feel like there is a basis. I feel like it could have been good, but please combine the 2 books together into one. That would have been way better. And from talking to friends about this book, I know I'm not the only person who feels that way about it, and it's a really big shame because other books of this author that I've already read were really good. So I just wish that these were like one bigger book with the 2 perspectives rather than having 2 separate books, one for each, because it just takes away from the story. After that, I went for a very much hyped book and actually bought the e-reader version, and it is Bride by Elise Hazelwood. Now, this was described to me as a vampire werewolf romance, and it is exactly that. It delivered so well. If you have seen the knotting kink things floating online, look it up first before you start reading the book. I think it is very well incorporated. I think this book was really well written. Okay, it was predictable, but what do you expect from a fantasy romance written by a romance writer? And that's something that I'm starting to notice, is whenever you have writers from other genres that have been writing for a longer time, that then suddenly make a fantasy book, or a fantasy romance in this case, I feel like it's fleshed out way better, or it feels more complete and less like as if the romance is the secondary plotline. I like it when the romance is the primary plotline in a book, but it has to be like displayed as is. So I personally really enjoyed Bride by Elise Hazelwood. I would give it a 4.5, maybe even 5 stars. That's how much I liked it. So the vampire girl we follow in this book is called Misery, and Misery is kind of collateral. There is a world where vampires, humans, and wares, because they're called wares instead of werewolves, and all 3 factions, as we're gonna call them, kind of live together in some sort of collaborative state. That's the best way you can describe it. But because humans can reproduce way faster than werewolves and vampires, there is something that they call collateral. So there is a human residing with the vampires and a vampire residing with the humans. And for the werewolves, I don't know exactly the way they do it, but it's something similar. So they have like an alliance between them, and as a peacekeeping, they have one of their children that is important residing with one of the other factions. And the main girl we follow, Misery is her name. She's been that collateral for the vampires in the human world, so she has been raised with humans mostly. She is working a normal human job and like trying to live her life as a human. She's called back because a new alliance needs to be formed between werewolves and vampires, and she has been chosen once again to be that collateral. So she has to get married to someone she has never met before, which is the werewolf in this book. That particular werewolf, of course, is the alpha of the local werewolf clan, and his name is Lo or Loey. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but he's like more or less the same age, or like he seems more or less the same age as her. And there is something going on with him where he's like taking his distance from her. Now she has to live with him and be his actual like wife, and he starts talking to her about the concept of mate and what it means, and all sorts of things within the werewolf community that don't exist within the vampire community. Now, of course, other things start happening. There is like a investigation going on in the book, which I really enjoyed because it takes away from just like the romance part, but it wasn't too heavily interfering that I felt like the book was more focused on the investigation than the romance. This definitely is a fantasy romance book, and if you like romance books by Elise Hazelwood, I think you will really enjoy this one as well. And in general, if you like smutty romantasy books, I think you will enjoy this one as well. So again, I gave this a 4.5 to 5 stars because I really enjoyed it that much. I will give it a little bit of resting time and maybe I change it to a 4 later on, but for now it was one of my favorite reads of February. And after that we have Elise Kova's A Deal with the Elf King. This is one of the books that I really wanted to read because I heard good things about it, but I am aware that this is a young adult fantasy romance and I actually kind of got tricked into buying this because it reminded me cover-wise of Slaying the Vampire Conqueror, which is another book that I have up there, which I am for sure going to read pretty soon. Otherwise, I'm not sure if I would have actually bought this book. In this book, we follow our main character, Luella. She is a human girl living in the human world that is connected somehow to the Fae world. And to keep the balance between the two worlds coexisting with this like voidish type space in between, every 50 years or 100 years, I could be mistaken, a human girl has to become the human queen of the Fae kingdom and be married to the Fae king. So in this book, we follow a girl that doesn't apparently have the magical powers that the human queen is supposed to have, but then a lot of things happen and she turns out to be it anyways. I'm not gonna spoil how, but it's very clear because we start following her from moment one that she will become this human queen. She is a very relatable character. She doesn't want to be held against her will. She has very much her own personality, and that I really liked actually. So she is taken late into the Fae kingdom, and you will see that that has some effects on that Fae kingdom. And as she is living in this Fae kingdom, she discovers that she actually has 3 months before she's actually tied into that realm that she could use to her advantage to make some sort of connection between the two worlds that isn't an actual human queen. So she starts plotting for that, reading journals of past queens, trying to figure out what she could possibly do, and she makes a deal with the Elf King that within that period of time that she isn't officially announced as the human queen in the elf world, she can investigate this and try and find a solution. Now, I did really enjoy this book, but by no means is it the best book that I've ever read. I know that there might even be a second book in the same realm or something, but I'm honestly happy that this book was over, that I could put it aside and that I could start something else. I did enjoy it. It was a very fast read for me. I think I finished this book in 3 days, so I did really enjoy it, but it's just not the best book ever. So if you're looking for a light fantasy romance that has more the focus on the fantasy than on the romance, I could highly recommend this, and I would personally give this book a 3 out of 5 stars. So these were the 5 books that I actually finished during the month of February, and I'm actually also reading a 6th book, but it's not in this video because it's not done yet at the moment of recording, and I'm still reading it. It is called Filthy Rich Vampire, and it is a smutty vampire romance book. And I will, of course, let you know my thoughts about that particular book in my March video together with the other books that I read during March. Feel free to let me know in a comment down below which books did you read during the month of February. Is there anything you want to share with me? And of course, feel free to let me know your opinions on the books that I've read if you've read them as well. I would love to know, and I love talking about books with you. Give this video a big thumbs up if you liked it, and if you'd like to be and you aren't already, feel free to subscribe to my channel. I make new videos every week and I would love to have you for every single one of them. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you very soon with a new video. Bye!